And now let's turn to Syria and the continuing battle for Aleppo. These images, they show the human toll that is being taken out on the civilians who are caught in the crossfire. United Nations estimates 50,000 residents remain. UN says the Syrian government's offensive is probably a war crime. I think pretty short we can take that probably out of it. We're also hearing stories of unimaginable suffering. Women committing suicide so they don't have to face the Syrian soldiers and get sexually assaulted. Entire families wiped out. Children murdered. Buildings filled with bodies. And the questions remain. Could this have been avoided? And could and should the U.S. have done more? President Obama, he made a point of avoiding another ground war in the Mideast. He's kept U.S. boots off the ground. He campaigned on that promise. That, however, left a vacuum that Russia has filled. And now the Russians are working with Bashar Assad's government, and the U.S. is basically on the sidelines. Now, many, including yours truly, are wondering whether this will damage not only the president's legacy and by how much, but more, where politically, practically, and most importantly, morally, we should have done more. And Dominic, I remember, I think it was in 2013, where the president had talked about the bright red line. If they cross this line, that's a bridge too far and we'll get involved. And I remember I was driving the car, and it was a Sunday, and the press conference I was expecting to hear, and by the way, everyone's expected to hear about what our next course of action was going to be. And then all of a sudden it was, never mind. A little bit more artfully said than that. Now, I know he was elected on being the president that wasn't going to be George Bush. And we weren't going to do regime building. We weren't going to go around the world trying to import democracy in every place, form whatsoever. But this ain't Monday morning quarterbacking. People said for years, if you don't address this, here's what's going to happen. Assad is going to continue. If there's a vacuum, Russia will fill it. And atrocities will happen, and you will have mass genocide. We talked about things that were happening. You had women going to priests today, reportedly, asking for absolution if they could kill their children so their children wouldn't be raped and murdered by the Assad forces that were coming through. Now, I should mention there's talk of potentially a ceasefire and all the rest being in place here, whether or not it'll hold for even an hour, let alone long term, who the heck knows. But nonetheless, it's almost too late with the atrocities that have happened. The president's a really smart guy. I believe he's a really good man. But he can't turn around and say, we had no idea this would happen. This was predicted. McCain and all the rest, Lindsey Graham, they said this was going to happen, and it followed to a cue. This is on his watch.
It is on his watch. And at the end of the day, whether he could accurately predict what was going to happen, even though most experts laid it out clearly, to your point, it's on his watch. And the president has to be careful because most presidents, when you get down to this time, they've checked out. And a president can never check out because this is such a bad stain on his record in terms of the humanitarian front. When you're a policeman of the world, you can't let these people they're freezing to death and they're being murdered. So you've got to do something.
Absolutely. And clearly, Putin read weakness and he filled the void. And is he an authoritarian animal? Is he all the bad things that we could say with more time? I agree 100%. But the president had options. He could have said there'll be a no-fly. And if a Syrian jet gets off the ground here, we're going to completely make it a parking lot and the rubble will bounce here as it relates, without putting ground troops on the ground. This is not a video game. Innocent people might have been hurt, but compared to what we see now, he had military options. And apparently there was huge debate internally as to what to do. Just to say, I'm no longer going to be an interventionist president because that's how I was elected, doesn't have universal application. And I'm sorry, this was, I think, to me, his lowest point as a president for what he did, or more importantly, didn't do.
It may very well be. I think America's appetite, as you rightly pointed out, for intervention was pretty minimal. And let's be honest, and I hate being the guy to say this, in general, we don't care. We don't care because it doesn't particularly impact American interest and it doesn't particularly impact Americans. And if you want to start making it an interventionist foreign policy where our mission is to stop genocide or stop mass slaughter, we can do that. But we'll have troops in every continent in the world from now until the end
You
of
could
time.
have made it a fair fight, though. But you could have made it a fair fight. That's not a fair
One more point, because we were
analogy.
talking about the no-fly, which is all well and good until we shoot down a Syrian plane, or even worse, we shoot down a Russian plane. And then what happens?
But if I follow that logic, then we don't get involved because we might get involved somewhere else. And if I follow the logic, if there is, and this is being called a Holocaust, if there's a Holocaust taking someplace else, because we don't care, we'll let those people die. I remember a phrase, never again. And I'm not getting on my moral high horse here, Andrew, because I know the appetite wasn't for American troops to be on the ground. But we could have taken out their airfields. And yes, we may have hit a jet. But more importantly to me, compare the mass number in the denominator of the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of women and children included that are being slaughtered in broad daylight as the world watches. And the world looks to us at the end of the day to say, what could you do? They used chemical weapons, and that was our bright red line that the president even stated, and he chickened out or he didn't go in. And it isn't being about a tough guy. It was his own standard that didn't follow through on.
I understand all of that. I do. But there are genocides that are going on in countries around the world right now.
But he chose to make this one his fight.
You want to
and
get
he didn't
involved in
follow
all
through.
of them?
No, he picked this one. The president, our president, picked this one. A president that we largely support on this program. But he picked it and he said it was a red line. And then he still let it go forward. And look at the actors involved now. Russia, Iran, and Bashar Assad. And now Russia's filled the void. They feel emboldened. And in a perverse way, people are saying, well, let's see what Trump would have done. Meanwhile, Trump has made Putin his BFF.
Well, I mean, I think we're going to find out over the next 4 years what happens when we get, potentially more involved in these situations that popped up, whether there's an appetite for them on Americans' behalf or not.
This much I know you both agree with. We're going to see more pictures.
It's a tragedy.
We're going to see, instead of children that drowned and wash up upon shore that we all remember, we're going to see atrocities that will take our breaths away. And we're going to see them in the next 24, 48, 72 hours. And then we'll all be collecting and ask, do we really care?
It's horrible, and we should care.
But we don't.
Gentlemen, thank you. Coming up next, we will bring in our panel of attorneys, and we're going to start with the Child Protective Services Agency in New York City. Under fire as we speak in the wake of yet another tragedy. Could caseworkers get in legal trouble if they didn't follow through or just do their jobs?